Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. I'm very happy to be here. And as you can see, I am joined by guest River Wood. Hi, River.
Hi, Chris. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine as frog fur.
Excellent. All right. Well, I have invited River onto my show because there is a story to be told about your upbringing, your association with, and escape from or leaving a group that is very cultish, very unique in its structure and its circumstance. Not something I quite with the anatomy that I've quite run into before, which I was fascinated by. This group is known by many names, including maybe you might have seen stories about this out there if you've seen a group referenced as 2x2s. River, what other titles or names for this group could people run into out there?
Well, when I was growing up in it, we were told that we didn't actually have a name because that was what worldly churches did. Like all those like 30 other worldly churches we passed on the way to ours. They had names, and that made them of the world and of other. And we weren't like that because supposedly our group went all the way back to Jesus and the disciples on the shores of Galilee and stuff. And Jesus didn't give his ministry a name, so we shouldn't either.
Okay.
Among ourselves, like you still need some kind of thing to refer to yourselves and others like you. And so words that would be used would be like the friends, right? Kind of with a capital F, our friends over in this place or our friends over in that place. And it does not mean friend in the normal sense of the word that most of us take it to mean, like, some friend. But it's with a capital F, and it's us, it's our group. We are the friends. Another way is they'll call it the truth, kind of with a capital T, because it's obviously not true, but they call it the truth. And they'll use this in like, well, how long have you been in the truth? Or when did you meet the truth? Or how long has your family been in the truth? Like, for example, I'm fourth generation in this group. I thought I was third, but I checked in with my mom and like, nope, there's one more generation back there. So
wow. Interesting. Yeah, this is an old group. This goes back to what, to the 1800s in Ireland?
1890 something ish. Yeah, I don't memorize all the dates and years and stuff, but late 19th century, and then I think they came to the west coast of the U.S. sometime around the turn of the 20th century.
Okay. And how would you describe to somebody who's not familiar with this, obviously like my audience, right? How would you describe what this group is as a religious entity? What makes them a religious entity, and how do they conduct themselves religiously? What's it about?
Well, I guess so that the idea that we were sold growing up was that this was like the original Jesus disciples was what started this. We didn't know about the founders that came from Ireland. We weren't taught about them. They were swept under the rug. When people would talk about them, like mostly you would get denial. Right? Like, oh, that's not true, or we don't know anything about that. And that didn't really change until feels late 80s, early 90s. And some folks from this church, I believe in Australia, went and started digging around and looking into old newspapers and stuff like that. And they wrote a book. It was called The Secret Sect. And this book went through my family at the time, sometime in the late or early 90s, I want to say. And when it went through my house, I read it. I was 11, 12, 13 years old, something like that at the time. And I'm like, wow, this sounds really familiar. Because the thing is there's no, in this church, there's no formal documentation of any kind. There's no website, there's no written charter, there's no paperwork, except for a few bits of things here and there that various leaders in the group have taken upon themselves to do for necessary legal purposes in whatever countries they reside in. For example, they wanted members to be able to be conscientious objectors in a draft. And you have to be some kind of like official religion in order to be a conscientious objector. So they had to file some amount of paperwork and give it a name, which that's a name that it was filed under legally for a time, was Christian Conventions of America. Oh, and that reminds me, other names too. Black Stockings was a name they used to have, and it's fallen out of favor because this is no longer a thing. But there was a time when black stockings for women were like all the rage. And I don't know when this was, 20s, 30s, 40s, something like that. And it became a name attributed to this group because this particular fashion trend persisted far longer in this group than it did anywhere else. And it turns out it was it was some of the leaders that liked this thing, and so they promoted it as godly.
Oh, of course they did. Of course they did. Well, you've just hit on something with this that I think is really important for the audience to get. Underline boldface here. There's nothing in writing. They have, I understand, I wanted to clarify this, that they do use the King James Version of the Bible as their sort of source material, but it's the speaking, the oral tradition, the fact that the ministers or the holy men of this group go around there. It's in the tradition of what are called itinerant ministers. They're walking, they go around, they're not tied down to a church or a building or even a home. They're constantly nomading around. Did I get that right? Is that how that is?
Yes, basically that is the case. The preachers are called workers, and they basically, it's voluntary. They will volunteer to the leadership to go out in ministry. They're expected to sell all of their worldly possessions and give the money into the work. And then they go join up with another more senior worker called the companion, and it's either two men or two women, single and theoretically celibate, but of course they're about as celibate as celibate Catholic priests, right? In a lot of cases. And then they do travel around and stay with people in the church, stay in their houses, and typically get fed by people in the church, that the friends. Basically, it's the friends of the workers is how you refer to the different people in the group.
How interesting, because even up to now in the internet age, these are not people with social media accounts, not people who are being tracked, or even, do they even have bank accounts?
Oh, yeah.
They do. Well, okay, so they do exist in the world.
Yeah, I mean, they exist in the world, and people give money, and the money's got to go somewhere, and the money, often money is given to the senior worker of a pair, whoever's in charge of an area, and then it kind of filters up from there. Some of them skim off and put it in some retirement accounts, but a lot of it makes it up to people who are not workers but in the church and have like businesses or do stuff with properties or whatever. And of course, people will leave their entire estates to the church. So there have to be structures in place to handle these financial issues, but no one actually knows where it goes or where it is or any of that. There's no financial transparency whatsoever to the members of the group.
Right. And they had to be able to get conscientious objector status, which means they had to get official religious status, which means that they're probably at this point 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization, or no?
No, there is no, to my knowledge. Okay, this is my understanding, and I could be mistaken, but there is no official paperwork on file with the IRS for a 501c3. Basically, everything is done underground. It's all like pretty much cash. There's no, the workers have no health insurance. They're not paying into Medicaid or any of that stuff. They basically don't exist as far as they might have social security numbers, but nothing they do is being reported. And no taxes are being paid on any of this. There's zero taxes going to the government from this group.
Okay.
And it's not tracked in the way that 501c3s have to track. And for that matter, churches are unique among the nonprofits for not having to actually make public their books.
That's right.
Kind of always a thing.
Well, see, and that's what makes me wonder at the highest levels if there isn't something there, but we wouldn't know, would we? And that's kind of the problem. Churches in the United States of America are automatically granted tax exempt status. They don't even have to file for it if they are a recognized religion or church. But I'm thinking at that crossroads point of the conscientious objector thing, that's might have when they, but who knows? This is all just conjectural. I have no idea. But the structure of this thing, regardless of any paperwork sitting in some file cabinet somewhere, there is no structure. There's a structure, but it's all verbal. It's all orally done. Is that right? I mean, these guys go around and preach the gospel in people's homes. Do they call it that? How do they even refer to that? Just the truth? They spread the truth or the word?
I'm trying to sort that out. That feels like several questions.
I know. I kind of landed at that last one of, well, what is it these ministers are actually running around doing? You said they go into people's homes and they preach, and apparently the preaching is the holy event. It's not reading, it's the preaching.
That is basically it. Yes. I'm at a loss for the term right now, but it is claimed that the workers speak directly for God. Essentially, that is what we were led to believe growing up is, whatever a worker tells you, you are expected to go along with. Whatever a worker tells you the Bible says, you're expected to go along with. And when two different workers tell you two different things about the same verse, you get a little messed up there. And then you try to pin each one of them down on something, and then you can't pin anybody down on anything. There's nothing written. And it's really very convenient because they can kind of change things as they will. And it's just, then it's all a big game of he said, she said. It's very abusive. But even when people write things down, like I've followed, for example, the Lloyd Evans channel for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like with Jehovah's Witnesses, you can see all the way through, they publish everything, and you can tell oh, this was their policy at this point, and then they change it. Mm-hmm. And that's not enough to get people out of it.
Oh, no, not at all. Of course not. Because changes is inevitable, and people will roll with those changes because cognitive dissonance is a beautiful thing. I guess what I'm wondering is now maybe kind of going in the direction of your story and your experience with this, because it's an interesting and bizarre framework. It's unique. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of groups out there who are set up this way and who can literally reinterpret their own history anytime they want, like denying that it has an Irish beginning. Like that's an established historical fact. Oh no, that's not true at all, because they don't think that way about how they keep track of their own history. It's a kind of a weird and fascinating thing, isn't it?
Well, I can tell you what my own father's reaction was when I read that book I was telling you about, and it's like, is this true? Oh yeah. Well, my mom knew William Irvin, the founder. And it's like, okay, why didn't you tell me this? Why have you let me be lied to all my life about this? And it's like, well, it doesn't matter so much. What matters is the truth of what Irvin did or what he started. And we kind of shunt him off to the side. And there's been various reasons given why he was shunted off to the side. But I think the most important was toward the end of his life, he started to fancy himself a prophet. and he wrote some prophecies, and none of them came true. And so that's automatically how you tell a false prophet, right? And you can't have a false prophet be the founder of your religion. So,
wow. Well, all makes sense. All makes sense. Well, let's get to your part of this because it's just so like, where did you fourth generation, so you're born into this. Where were you born? How were you, what was the normal you were raised with? Let me put it that way.
The normal I was raised with. So I was born in Central California, well, kind of Bay Area, and grew up in Southern California. And basically this was my whole life. We had meetings 3 times a week: Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and Wednesday evening. And so none of these were, unless they were at our house, they were usually at least half an hour away. So you've got, prep time to get ready and get cleaned up and spiffed up and get ready to go and drive to church, however far away. And when you're a little kid, this is pretty much making up all your life.
Did you go to school? I mean, you had public school education, or was it a private thing, or how did, like, 3 times a week is not your entire life. So what else was going on?
Right. Yeah. So school. I started school in kindergarten, public school.
Mm-hmm.
There was no preschool or any of that. So like, I wasn't very socialized, very well socialized. But yeah, I did go to public schools, and a lot of folks in this group do send their kids to public school, which is good, I came to find out, which is really good. I was prejudiced against public schools, but that was really for the best. So yeah, and then, of course, growing up, then it's school and church 3 times a week. And then between eating and sleeping, and that's it. That's your life.
Got it. And what did church consist of for you as a kid? What happened at it?
Well, each one of these is a little different.
Oh, okay.
And I'll try to give a quick sketch.
Yeah.
The Sunday morning meeting is basically the worship service that's held in the living room of one of the members of the church, and the owner of the house is the elder. There have been some women elders in recent years. If they are the owner of the house and they're single, that's okay. But usually it's the male of the home is the elder, and this is sort of assumed. It's very, very sexist religion. So everybody files into this living room Sunday morning and ahead of the appropriate time and sits there and basically stares at the floor until the meeting begins. And then the elder will suggest a couple of hymns to sing, and everyone sings them a cappella, basically. No music or anything like that, no instruments. Then you have a time for people to offer up whatever prayers, and then more hymns, and then what's called testimonies, which people will stand up and share whatever's on their mind, or whatever, some Bible passage, some story, and whatever the lesson they feel it has for their life in this particular week. And a lot of people just kind of phone it in. And some people get really emotional at times, and it's not exciting. And then there's more hymns, and then there's like the little communion ritual, which they call the emblems typically, but I guess in places they call it communion. Usually like Wonder Bread and grape juice, because in the U.S. in this group anyway, alcohol is frowned upon. So every event you ever go to is a dry event. It's very very dry.
Wow. So even the transmogrification, or whatever word that transmutation thing, is not good enough. It's, oh no, that's alcohol. No. We're not going to use that as the vessel. How interesting. Yeah. How interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's very teetotaling, abstinence based kind of religion. So that's the Sunday morning thing, give or take a few minor variations here or there.
Sure.
The Sunday afternoon thing is what they call gospel meeting. And this is typically held in like a rented hall somewhere in a nearby town, like a school auditorium, for example.
Oh, would that many people show up that you'd have like hundreds of people? Yeah,
because that would be people coming from further around or groups. Like there'd be multiple home churches around, a metro area or whatever, and then they come together for one of these bigger meetings, and that's where you have the workers in that particular field will give sermons, and there will be some hymns, and sometimes there will be a piano to accompany them in this case. And basically it's just the workers preaching their message. Theoretically, this is supposed to bring new people into the church, but that hasn't happened very much in the last several decades, thanks to so much information being out there about them, and people can Google them very easily and be like, no thanks.
Oh no, of course, absolutely. You mentioned the field that the workers, the minister people, have a field, have an area. Is that the term that's used within the church for that? Is this workers' field?
That's correct. Yes.
It's only interesting to me because in Scientology we would use that terminology.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like the Denver field is the area around the Church of Scientology of Denver that it's responsible for, which means the entire state of Colorado, and Wyoming, and most of Kansas, and a lot of Montana. But that's the church's field. That's its area of reach and sphere of responsibility is how it's used in Scientology. So I just heard that word and thought, oh, that's an interesting small parallel.
Well, so in our group, a field was whatever region one pair of workers was responsible for. And it will have a number of meetings within it, home church groups.
Right.
And then those home church groups will get together for the gospel meetings on Sunday afternoons. And sometimes these are on like Friday nights or Saturday nights too, if the workers in question are particularly concerned about too much sin in their fields. But then in charge of a number of fields across a larger region, for example, California is part of a region with I want to say Nevada and Arizona and Hawaii or whatever. So it'll consist of all the fields in that region, and at the top of that will be one single, always male overseer, is what he's called.
Overseer. Oh, there's nothing ominous about that word. Okay.
The overseer.
Yeah, of course. I mean, reading about this group without having any dogma or doctrine to find in writing it creates a mental picture for me of people like the Amish, like primitive people living in a primitive way. And I guess it's not that way if y'all were, had a Southern California congregation. It's not like that's farmland or Amish territory. You're talking about the middle of Southern California. So modern trappings, but a very old school style meeting and oral tradition, I guess. Am I getting this right?
You could maybe you could consider it to be like kind of like the illegitimate offspring of the Amish and like more modern day evangelicals.
Yeah.
Or Pentecostals. Although we didn't do the speaking in tongues thing, which I always found that weird, but
yeah. And the snake biting I can definitely do without.
Yeah, but like the dress codes and the misogyny and all of that is very, very, like, it's not quite Amish.
But it's there.
It gets there. Like there's always this talk about modest dress. Like women are told not to cut their hair and they always have to wear it up in buns. And because, loose hair is a distraction or sin or something like that. It depends on who you ask, honestly. But that's kind of one of the rules. No makeup, no jewelry, no pants. Although like people are beginning to bend these rules because they're like, well, what's your biblical justification for this? And they're actually standing up to the workers and they're being like, put this stuff in writing. We dare you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was going to say, where's this dress code written? I guess the workers just come along and frown at you, and you're supposed to get the idea that you're not.
Oh, they will call you out publicly.
Oh, they'll just straight up. You stop wearing the pants. Yeah.
They will straight up preach it in the gospel meetings, or if they're at any other kind of gathering and they see something they don't like, they will stand up and they will admonish the whole room about that particular unacceptable behavior.
Okay. So has this engendered then a rather full of themselves, egotistical power trip attitude?
Oh, absolutely. It does.
Yeah.
And
that makes
one
sense.
thing I didn't mention yet is that both of my parents had been workers before they got married and had kids.
Okay. So they had that backstory that they were bringing in.
I'm a preacher's kid. Yeah. Right. My dad did that for 16 years and my mom for 3.
Okay, where they were itinerant, running around house to house. And this is not just visiting a house. Aren't they like staying there?
Yeah.
So, because they don't have their own place.
Right. Well, okay. So generally speaking, that is the case. Okay. In a field where there are enough friends to stay with, they will stay with friends who have, and this depends on people having means to provide for them too. Like, it just typically works out that the workers will spend more time at the homes of people with more money and more space and more time. Right.
Right.
But for example, in foreign missions, where there aren't so many people yet, they'll use funds from from other areas to rent a place for the workers to stay, and they'll just find some cheap place to stay, and they call it a batch for bachelor.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So there's all kinds of little details to this that emerge as you go into looking into how this whole thing operates. And yet there's no manuals. There's no, like, how does somebody, I'm just going to fire the questions as they come to me as we're talking here, because I'm finding this absolutely fascinating. How does one rise to become a worker in the first place? It's not training. It's not like, well, I read the Bible 20 times, or is it? How do you go about that?
Well, I guess the first parts would be you have to what's called profess. And this is like you profess your intention to serve Jesus, to serve God, to serve it's essentially to serve the workers, since that's how it always works. God's always out of the office, but you can talk to middle management.
Right. Right.
But professing you can do, it's a voluntary action that that's actually a lie. It's supposedly a voluntary action, where you stand up at some point in a meeting and I'm professing now. And then that makes you responsible for offering up prayers and testimonies in the Sunday morning meetings, as well as the Wednesday night Bible study meetings.
Okay. So that's sort of a step in the direction of putting yourself on the path to becoming a worker?
Yeah, that's kind of like the first step. And then the next step would be baptism. And this typically is usually later in life. It doesn't usually happen before someone's 16, 18, 20, something like that. And this never came up for me. I professed when I was 11 or 12, and I'll go into that story a little bit later. But I never got to the baptism part because my family got kicked out of the church first. And that's a whole nother story too.
Yes. And we will be getting to that soon, because there is, if it's not clear yet, viewers, right? I mean, the framework is here for a great deal of potential abuse and the cover-up of that abuse. And I'm suspecting that that's exactly where this is going to go, given the recent revelations about this group. So that all being said, let's go ahead and get to your story. And I think in the telling of that, we will explain the rest of these details. You grew up in this, you went to public school. This was your normal growing up, I suppose, was these meetings and these people coming around and this kind of thing. How else was your life? Do you see it looking back now? How else was it affected by and different because of this experience?
So back then, anyway, there were pretty strict rules about engagement with the world. So anyone who wasn't part of our group was the world. And worldly things included stuff like television and movies and dancing and TV. Well, I said TV.
Anything entertaining, distracting, not. Is it kind of a Protestant sort of view? Like the more suffering, the better in your life? Is that kind of where they're coming from with this?
Yeah, it's very, very kind of Calvinist. Like,
Yeah.
You should not have any pleasure in life because all, any pleasure is Satan trying to tempt you away from our perfect way of doing things.
Right.
And so yeah, you're taught to avoid all that. Well, what it does to you. Oh, and I should point out, you're also definitely discouraged from having friends outside of our group. Right?
Of course.
So kids in this group tend to grow up very isolated from their peers. Like, it's worse for kids that are homeschooled in a lot of cases or private schooled, but even going to public school, and I went to, large schools and large districts and had lots of other kids around to be isolated in this way. Like, they had things to talk about that I had no clue, right? They'd be talking about shows on TV or movies they saw. Like, kids talked about Star Wars and whatnot. I had no idea of any of that. Right. It's very alienating and isolating, and you grow up feeling like just a total fish out of water.
It's such an unfortunate thing. We know this already. I'm not going to be saying anything original here, but it's very, very infuriating to me looking at the various ways that this manifests across different groups. Most of them, in my experience, especially in the United States, of a Christian flavor, various flavors of this, that the parents go all in on this stuff, and then the children are the ones who end up really suffering the most. And you're fourth generation, so your own parents were raised in this, and their parents. So this was just, as far as they were concerned, suffering and no enjoyment in life was just how it was. This is just laid into them. This is how it is, and this is the righteous way to live.
That's basically it. Like, Jesus. I've had many conversations with my mother about this and how much pain and trauma I went through. Like, I don't know if you've looked into religious trauma syndrome.
Oh yeah.
But basically it's complex PTSD caused by religion, essentially. Right. And yeah, I had this constant fear, just paralyzing fear growing up because, I was taught in church that, God helps the righteous with their problems if you pray for help. Like, and here I was being bullied at school. I was being bullied at home. I was being bullied at church. Like, everything, my life was just terror all the time. Like, I never knew when there was another whipping coming or when I was going to get in trouble for something. Or when somebody
So it was physical discipline at home then.
Oh yeah. My dad would use a belt on us. My mom would use a stick. Like, it's and this is very much encouraged in this group. Sorry, this is bouncing all over the place, but like, this is expected in the group, is that children are to sit still and be quiet in the meetings, and they're expected to sit still and be quiet with the adults. Like, they don't do anything special, no Sunday school or daycare or anything for the kids. From a very young age, kids are expected to sit still, be quiet through an entire hour or hour and a half long service. And they do this by, when the kids get noisy, they take them outside and they hit them until they stop.
Right.
And right. that comes from the platform, from the workers. And my dad was one of those workers. And I remember growing up and hearing him tell tables full of people that exact same thing. And like, you didn't even have to wait till they were out of diapers as far as he was concerned.
Jesus.
So this is how this discipline is enforced in the group. It's literally child abuse.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, full on. And we are, so many people's eyes were opened to this with Shiny Happy People and seeing how the Gothards and the Duggars, represented this attitude. And it's an attitude in the same way that there's a misogyny that runs as a constant thread through so many of these structures. so too does child abuse. And it's just straight up child abuse. There's no other word or way to describe it in a modern context. Children are straight up abused, and this is called normal, and this is called rearing children or raising up a child, as Michael Pearl wrote about in his book, where he compared this directly as not an analogy, as a direct comparison to how you break a horse or break a donkey or a pet. Is you beat on them until they do what you tell them to do. And this is 1950s Skinner psychological conditioning, and it will work, but the long-term effects of it, work in that you end up with a zombie human being as a child. And this is the desired product of this kind of thinking and this culture that is manifest in 2x2s as well as these other groups. And this is where my blood starts boiling, is when innocent victims of this, children who never asked for this, never wanted this, and were never asked if they wanted to be part of this, are tortured until they shut up, so that they go along with and conform with it until it becomes their version of normal, which is why I phrased my question that way to you earlier, because it's just, this is normal for you. And I find that absolutely horrifying that that's allowed to occur in modern society under any context, including religion. And that's my soapboxing on that. So I'll step down now and let you carry on with your narrative. Sorry.
No, absolutely great. Like, it's good for people to hear the same things emphasized in different words too. It is absolutely the case that it has lifelong effects. It does make the zombie children. It also makes zombie adults.
That's right.
It messes you up. The long-term effects of PTSD include your brain actually shrinks, like physically shrinks. This stuff messes you up for your entire life. You can do some trauma recovery from it, and you can get yourself good coping mechanisms, and you can set yourself on a good track in life. But ultimately, it's still going to mess with you, and it's still the damage that is permanent and is never going to go away. This has been studied up one side and down the other. You've heard of adverse childhood experiences, I'm sure, the ACEs scores. And we know that these kinds of abusive things that happen in childhood lead to long-term physical health effects, heart disease, and even obesity and substance abuse and anxiety and depression and all these things. Like, it's flat out harmful.
And it's a created, this is the tragedy of this. This is the thing that really gets me going, is it's a created problem. None of this had to happen. A belief set and a group of fanatical morons create this environment and then persecute children in it. And other people look at this and go, freedom of religion. And I go, fuck you. It's a crime. That's what it is. And it's not a religion. And this is a manifestation of this. Again, I get really upset with the kids. Part of this, grown ass adults, you can go make your own decisions as an adult. Children don't have that freedom. And raised in environments like this, it's just, it's horrifying.
You're basically in a prison.
Yeah.
Like, you're locked into a prison and you can't get out. There's no escape from it. Like, there's no contacting child protective services either, because that's of the world.
Right.
Like, you're literally afraid to even try to go get help from anyone because you don't trust anyone. And everyone you think you can trust is already in your church and they're friends with your parents.
Yeah.
And they all perpetuate the same cycle of child abuse.
Exactly.
And like, they also gaslight you into thinking it's for your own good. Like, when I was in my early 20s and I might have found myself, having a family or whatever, I would have thought it was perfectly acceptable way to raise children was to hit them. And I'm glad I learned different. And I'm glad I didn't end up having kids to harm another generation. At least that cycle will end with me.
And if there is something good coming out of this, that is one of the things. Because it does need to end. Somebody has to say no. Somebody has to say stop. And it's best when it's the member themselves who kind of wakes up and goes, holy shit, this is just not okay. Oh,
yeah. Well, but, like you pointed out with IBLP and with Michael Pearl and all of that, this stuff is rampant across Christianity.
Yes.
And not all Christianity, hashtag not all Christians, right? But like it's the majority.
It's sad to say this, and I think people need a little bit of a wake up call to this, because we tiptoe around it sometimes. We talk about freedom of religion, and freedom of religion is absolutely essential as a human right. Do not get me wrong on that. It's absolutely essential, but that doesn't give you the right to abuse children in the name of those beliefs.
Well, there's this, and I'd like to kind of dive maybe toward the subject of like intersection between religious beliefs and civil law.
Go ahead.
This is really important because my group, like all the other fundamentalist groups, this is a thing common to fundamentalists and evangelicals kind of as a category, is that the Bible is the ultimate authority for everything. Everything about you need to run your life is in the Bible. And that is why so many of these groups are completely helpless, for example, to do anything about the issue of child sexual abuse, because there's absolutely nothing in the Bible about it.
Except that it's okay under certain circumstances.
Well, I mean, if you look at the cultural context of like how old was old enough back in those days, yeah, we would consider that absolutely unacceptable. And another example is the Bible says only one thing about rape in its entirety, and that is that if a rape occurs, the perpetrator is punished by being required to purchase the woman from her father,
right?
And she must marry him. Right. And this only counts if she is a virgin, 1, and 2, it's only rape if she screams. And this is the entirety of what the Bible says about rape.
Right.
So with these, and the entirety of what the Bible says about raising children basically is don't spare the rod.
Right. Exactly.
And so you're dealing with a group of people who are using this particular book as an instruction manual, and it comes to us from thousands of years ago from primitives who didn't have microscopes or telescopes and didn't know anything about the world.
That's right.
This is the thing that has to be overcome. Like they're trying to fix this big sex abuse scandal, but they can't fix it as long as they believe the Bible is the greater authority than
the law.
Than the law of the country
or society around them or the culture in which they live.
Correct.
And this is why at the end of the day, in talking to you about this, it becomes clear why this is an actual cultic group, even though there's no central leader telling everybody what to do directly. It's all this verbal oral tradition through these workers, but this culture is a self-perpetuating cult. And because the activities of this group are so abusive, and we're not talking about Sunday meetings when we're talking about this, this is going to get worse before it gets better, because this goes to darker places than we've even gone to yet. But when you give this much power and authority and influence to a select number of people who consider themselves God's chosen elite, do not ever dare to be surprised later on when all the horror stories come out, because this is just human nature. So that all being said, where does this go?
Many different directions.
Understood. Sorry about this. If I'm giving you too much generalized direction here, what I'm specifically curious about is structurally, organizationally, right? This year, there was, I'm understanding enough from what you've said about your childhood and upbringing that I get that you was a monster factory in a hellhole, and it was all under the guise of religious, righteousness. And I get that. Are there any other aspects to your upbringing or your time growing up in this that set it apart or make it different enough that we should comment on it here in terms of this group and what it does?
I think I would tie into what I was starting to say earlier about being isolated from the world around me. It just made me very, very different, and it's very foreign to interact with other human beings. And this is very dissociative too. I came to learn later.
Are you referring here? Are you familiar with like under attachment theory? We're talking about like disorganized, chaotic attachment.
I'm not. I don't.
Fair enough.
I don't know enough about that to
No problem.
comment on that. What I would say is that maybe we can talk about sort of the mental control aspects of it.
Sure, go ahead. How were those laid in, or what were the rules or strictures that put those in place?
So basically, as a kid growing up in this group, this is your entire life. This is your entire world, and you're told that this is the right way to do things. Everything is we are doing things right, and you're told you're given implicit trust in the workers because your parents implicitly trust the workers, and whatever the overseer for your region says is basically that's law. Mm-hmm. You know, for example, back in, I don't know, my dad was what was called in the work in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that some time period around there. And like it was decided, oh, well, the friends down in this area, that too many of them have radios in their house. And so the overseer tells my dad, you go tell those people to get rid of their radios. And they're expected to obey. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's basically the level of authority and control that exists within this group. Is the overseer is considered to have all the authority.
Right. And do the workers come into a home then and see a radio and go, I'm telling you to get rid of this? Or do they communicate it as the overseer has instructed me to ensure that no radios exist anywhere in the field? Sort of thing.
More like that, probably, and then some scripture on top of it.
Okay. Okay. So it's kind of comes down that way, as there is this sort of authority chain of command kind of thing that's recognized, but it's not really written down anywhere.
And basically they have a I don't know if they really have a carrot so much as a stick. Mm-hmm. They can take away your professing privileges temporarily. So for example, they can tell you not to take part in the meetings. Like you can't stand up and give your testimony until you repent of your sins and you get right. Or they can do something more extreme. Like if you're a person who has a meeting in your home, there's extra scrutiny on you. For example, when I was a early teenager, my parents had we had the Wednesday night Bible study meeting in our house, and there was a situation developing within the church where there was talk about what to do about this issue of divorce and remarriage, because this was frowned on. If you got divorced, if you got remarried, they would kick you out, or they would tell you couldn't take part anymore or whatever. And my parents had made friends with enough people who had been divorced and remarried and heard people's stories. And some of these stories were pretty like extreme.
In terms of spousal abuse?
In terms of spousal abuse.
Yeah. Okay.
One couple that was kind of like an aunt and uncle to me, her first husband had basically threatened to kill her and fully would have followed through with it, and she bailed out and had to flee the country even. And here the workers were telling her that because she was raised in the truth, that she had to divorce her current husband, who was awesome, and go back and marry the asshole that threatened to kill her.
You gotta be kidding me with this crap.
Absolutely not.
Jesus Christ, man. I mean, even when common sense is staring you in the fucking face, no, you have to go back to your abuser. I mean, this is where I was talking about a few weeks ago, where evil is created. This is how it happens.
Absolutely.
Is this rigidity of thinking, this inability to look at who's actually in front of you, but to see everything through this filter of Stone Age barbaricism. I mean, it's just so disgusting to me. I'm sorry. When it comes to stuff like this, this is what keeps me in this field, is because it's just so horrible.
So these are orders that my parents would give people.
I understand. I do.
My dad would tell people these things, and it wasn't until much later, much later in life that he starts listening to people tell their stories and realizing that he did bad things by telling people this. And he started speaking up, and he's like, you know what? We need to be okay with this. Let God sort it out. Like,
exactly.
Some people need to be separated. This is just a fact. And and he had to find his own Bible verses to justify his interpretation of it.
Right.
And one time the workers in our field came to our house and they said, you need to stop saying this or we will take the meeting out of your house. And that's like, that's a death knell right there. Like,
no, I get it. Yeah.
Now you are under warning and everyone knows it.
Right.
And
so participation in this activity and is a social status point which can be threatened and taken away, and that's at least the first or the primary way that control is exerted over the members is by denying or taking away these so-called privileges.
That is one method of control.
That's one. Yeah. I'm just sort of like thinking, well, why would people go on with this? Why would that be a thing? Oh, you're going to take the meeting away. Oh no. Right. But for them, that actually has great importance.
Well, yeah. It's a status thing.
Right.
There is a lot of actual backstabbing over this kind of thing too. Is like who has the meetings and who doesn't, and whose families are right with the workers and whose families are on the outs and yada yada. Like there is a big kind of social status game that goes on. And my parents had status from being former workers before and knowing a lot of people. So like that was definitely like. Yep.
No, the picture is coming more into focus here. It's kind of like those old Polaroids, right? It's coming more and more into focus here because as you talk more and more about this, and I knew that this was going to be how the conversation would go as more and more details of this emerged, that you have this group of quote unquote godly people who are in fact acting exactly the opposite in almost every aspect of their life, between child abuse and spousal abuse, and then backstabbing, gossip mongering, status climbing, influence peddling. I mean, it's all there. It's right under the surface, I imagine, in this group, the way you've described it.
Well, the belief system kind of encourages that. And the belief system, I was going to say that I still think the primary method of control is the belief system itself. And that is the belief in the Bible as the word of God. Like the Bible is your authority. And this is really a foundational problem, not just for this group, but for all of Christianity that takes the Bible as anything more than a collection of old stories.
Right.
This is where it comes from. When you grow up in this system, when you grow up in this environment, this is everything to you. And God is real and present for you. And you're told that God talks to you in your head. You pray at night or you pray whenever you're telepathically talking to God. Like, your words that you're envisioning in your head somehow have a back channel right to, an answering machine up in heaven somewhere.
Right. Are you also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. There's more to this.
Yes.
And that God talks back to you.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask. So there's your disassociation right there. There's the beginnings of it right there. Right.
Yeah. Kind of. But like it's the thoughts in your head are supposedly God condemning you of your sin. And you're also told that you're not supposed to doubt. Doubting God is the worst thing you can do to God because God is up there and definitely real and definitely loves you, and doubting him is the worst thing that you can do. So you get trapped in this cycle in your brain of like, what's going on? I'm praying. Am I righteous enough to deserve help or answers to my prayers? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I need to try harder. Maybe I need to do more stuff. What's going on? And then you hear these little voices in your head like, oh, well, you're messing up this and you're doing this and this is bad. And it's like, it gets very OCD like. And then like And then you ask yourself, well, like, is this even really a thing I need to worry about? Ooh, that's doubt. We can't go there. And boom, boom, boom. It just like, it's this self-reinforcing, automatically perpetuating anxiety cycle that goes on in your head that keeps you basically paralyzed in fear and in this group. And this sounds crazy in the context of the modern world. Like if you zoom out to the modern world and you look at what humans are and what we know about humans as evolved primates with technology far beyond our biology's ability to keep up, all this stuff, that's a completely different picture of the world. But when you're in this religious model, in this fundamentalist model, this is your entire worldview.
Right.
This is how everything you see is through this lens, like this lens of God is everywhere, Satan is everywhere. Every interaction is colored by this stuff, and everything you do is you're judging internally and beating yourself up internally by whether you're doing the right thing or not.
Well, exactly. And I want to comment in light of recent comments I've made on my channel, recent stuff we've been talking about regarding disassociation, dissociative identity disorder, and other manifestations of dissociative phenomena, because you don't have to have a full-blown disorder in order to experience a dissociative incident. And if this is being enforced on you from a young age, that this is reality, that this dissociative state of there's a voice in your head answering your prayers, condemning you, telling you how awful and horrible you are, but he loves you all the time, and doubting that voice and doubting the reality of it is doubting God himself, and therefore the ultimate sin. You put this in the head of a child and you continue to reinforce it with trauma, beatings and the rest. This is you might as well just rip this right out of the literature on how to drive somebody crazy, how to drive them into a state of mind where they don't anymore. And by crazy, I mean into a state of mind where they're no longer capable of separating delusion from reality. The reality in front of them and the delusory ideas in their mind have the same level of importance and reality to their ability to perceive the world. And yeah, I'm saying that this is something that's been going on for centuries and millennia in human history, and there's been a lot of people driven really crazy because of this. This is what we're now understanding about these disorders and about this phenomena and what it does to you. And when it's reinforced with trauma, it is, as you mentioned earlier, it becomes or can become a permanent condition that you're not going to heal from.
Well, you're basically inhabiting an alternate reality.
Right.
It's not reality what's happening in your head. And you hear voices, and those voices are condemning you. Oh, this thing you're doing, this is a sin. Don't do this. You're taught to believe this is God talking to you.
Right.
But it's not. It's your parents. And everybody has voices in their head. Just a quick side note. One of my favorite things I like to recommend to people is a video of a talk by P.Z. Myers called "There Are No Ghosts in Your Brain." And this was really important to me. I studied neuroscience in college and learned like how brains work and what the different regions of them do and stuff. And it's like, this was finally enough to tell me like, oh yeah, those voices in my head that are like telling me I'm bad and I'm broken, I'm evil and I'm terrible and all this other stuff, that came from somewhere else. That's not, but it's also just me. Like it's in my head, but it's not coming from like God. It comes from my childhood, and I get to reprogram that if I want to.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, so this is the big mechanism of control, is just teaching you this belief system, this false worldview. And I've used different metaphors for it. Like you can say it's a bad mental map or cognitive map.
Sure.
Right. Like, and this is just kind of an abstraction or a metaphor or an allegory to describe what our reality is. But like, if you want to go hiking in the mountains, you need a map. You're going to drive cross country, you need some kind of map of the territory. It's a representation of the territory that helps you make sense of it and where you're at and where you're going. And so religion gives you a bad mental map. Another way to put it is religion is buggy software on your hardware. So like you're a hardware as a human meat suit, and growing up, what you're taught is the software that's programmed into your hardware. And religion gives you bad software that's giving you the wrong outputs. It's filtering the inputs through the wrong kinds of algorithms and giving you bad outputs. There's many different ways to look at this situation.
Sure. No, absolutely. Of course there is. I want to ask you a question. I don't want to, just argue or contradict you, but I'm curious about your response to this thought I'm having about, you said the basis of this, or the most fundamental aspect of this, is the inerrancy of the Bible, right? And that the Bible is the core key concept of this whole thing. And yet with 2x2, there's an additional layer, and this is not unique to 2x2 by any stretch of the imagination. I'd argue this is the case for most religion, in fact, is it's not only the existence of a book, which is supposed to be symbolized and idolized as inerrant, but how do we experience that? Through interpretation, through another human being or group of human beings. And in your case, it was the workers coming around and telling you what it says. And in fact, for 2x2s uniquely, it's that part of the experience that is the most religious or holy part of the experience, if I've understood this correctly. So does that not play a key part in this as well?
Yeah, it actually does. And this plays a key part in a lot of other denominations of Christianity too. It's like,
absolutely, sure,
the Bible is our authority, and the preacher man knows how to interpret it correctly. So you just listen to him do it for you. This is very common. Yep. I mean, this is even Catholic Church does this. The Mormons, every group does this. It's like, yeah, sure, we give the nod of some authority to the Bible, and like, for example, the Catholic Church is like not just the Bible, but these other documents and other stuff and church tradition and all this. But ultimately, it is coming from the mouth of a human.
That's right.
Delivering the message they want to give you.
That's right. Because if it was a simple matter, just a logic argument, it's just a logic trap, whatever. It's just thoughts I'm having, but I'm just thinking about, the source of the problem. And I harp often on this point. So I want to harp on it again, which is that the people who can tell you, who interpret your perceptions, who interpret what you're supposed to think or think about or carry away from an experience, are the ones who control you. Because their interpretation of the event is what you then accept as your version of reality. You perceive something. Something happens to you, whether it's an awe experience, a euphoric experience, a beating, whatever it is that happens. And somebody tells you this is what that experience means. And that's where, if we buy into that interpretation, and we don't always, sometimes we go, you're crazy, you're full of shit. That's not true. That's not what happened. But if we buy it, and often we do, that person now controls our thinking to that degree. And that can be used in a good way, but often, and especially in abusive cults, it's used in a knowing, premeditated way to control you. And I want to break that down for people because I want them to understand that a book is a book. It's what you do with it and how you're told to think about it that causes all the trouble, if I may. But that's my thinking on it. I wanted to get your feedback on my view of that.
It is true to a great extent. Yeah, I agree. Like, okay. If someone, and this is very Orwellian too. I think this kind of came out in 1984, for example. Is, whoever can interpret reality for you is giving you what reality is. Like, there's functionally no difference for your brain between reality and what you believe reality to be.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
That's whoever can control your reality and control how you see things is going to control a great deal of you and your behavior, your your information, your time, your energy, your emotions.
Yeah, that's right. That was my biggest takeaway from all the work and looking I did at Neuroscience. Was there's the perception and there's the interpretation of the perception. And those two things are not the same thing. And I was absolutely fascinated by that, because when you look at it through a lens of control and what cults do or manipulators do, right, it suddenly makes total sense. The brain's operating exactly the way it's supposed to, but they're kind of slipping in the middle of that process and going, what you saw isn't this, it's this. What you heard isn't this, it's this. And you go, oh, really? Oh, okay. And now you're in another reality, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Another one of my favorite metaphors I was just reminded of is The God Virus by Daryl Ray. I don't know if you've interviewed him.
I have interviewed Daryl Ray. He's a great guy. Yeah. What's the point that's coming to mind for you?
Wonderful. Well, he describes religion as basically kind of like a brain virus, and I guess Richard Dawkins has described this as a mimetic virus or whatever.
Yep.
But religion can take over your brain and cause the human organism to behave and think in different ways than it otherwise would without that particular worm or virus in there.
I think in
a sense, like, are you familiar with like the cordyceps fungus that can take over the brain of ants and just like that? Like, I realize this is a metaphor, but like, if you really drill into it, a meme is a thing that takes on a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, belief systems, they have a life of their own. They can pass from host to host, you know, parasitically.
That's a framing device. I find it an interesting one, and I certainly have contributed to conversations talking about religion that way. I only push back now to the degree that I see that there is utility in religion and that there are social aspects of religion that are, in our current state of being at least, are necessary. Or serve a function that nothing else seems to be serving yet. Not to say that something else couldn't step up and serve that function, but to date, it hasn't happened. But that all being said, we're talking, and of course, my show is a lot more about the dark side of this and where things go really, really wrong. And when they go wrong, they go really wrong. Even overwhelmingly wrong, where it can appear that there's nothing good about this thing. And it's taken me a lot of years to come around to that way of thinking without having faith myself. I am not a believer, and without excusing or using that utility, that social utility that religion has, to justify or rationalize the abuses, because they're not okay and there's no reason for them to be okay. And where academia falls down is there are too many people in academia who don't see it that starkly and honestly, and I'm always bothered by that. So,
okay. Religious fundamentalism tends to find itself aligned very closely with conservative politics in the U.S., and this has been a bidirectional causality kind of thing. You know, we know how the religious right adopted abortion as its central issue after Roe v. Wade to use for political power and get people to vote Republican and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was very. How far down the rabbit hole have you gone on that, by the way?
Oh, way further than I want to talk about.
Okay. Did you get to the class segregation part where it started with that, not Roe v. Wade? And how the Christian nationalists and evangelicals used to not have a problem with abortion?
Yeah. I actually just finished reading Andrew Seidel's book, American Crusade.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got fully filled in on that one.
I've interviewed him twice, but I haven't read that book. But I've done other study that led me down that rabbit hole. And yeah, it was quite what the fuck, right?
No, yeah, for sure.
You know,
there's this huge amount of overlap for another way too, and it's like when I was still in the church, someone introduced me to Rush Limbaugh, and I started getting into that, and then pretty soon, like, I was listening to Alex Jones every day.
I was down the same rabbit hole as a Scientologist.
Yeah, well, they talk to you in the same language that you're already used to. They talk about God and higher ideals and morality and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's language that already has a considerable overlap with fundamentalist Christianity.
Yeah, true that. True that.
And then all they have to do is tell you that Democrats are, devil worshiping, blah, blah, blah. And then that colors your whole view of politics and America and everything at once.
That's right. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons for that. So there's that angle as terms of why you feel religion is contributory to, or more bad than good.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
To harken back to your previous point about can religion have any function? Yeah, in a sense, it can have a function. Like for a lot of people, their church is their social group. It's where they meet with people they know on a regular basis. And humans need this. This is a very deep-seated primal human need, is to connect with others, to have a tribe, to have a group, to have friends. And a lot of people, their living lives or dies by their social network.
That's right. That's exactly right. Status is not an option in a human existence.
But as you and I know, there's ways to create these communities without religion.
Oh, there are, but not for everybody. And that's where the problem comes, is some people won't go a secular route ever. And that becomes a problem for secular-minded people because we can't reach them.
Well, people find other kinds of communities too. Like one thing about the world as it is now is people might find that social community among gamers, whether it be video gamers or tabletop games. It might be through, Star Trek conventions. It might be through music or sports, or people find ways to make these communities for themselves without the religion.
They do, but they don't find communities that answer or address or deal with existential issues. And that's something that Star Trek conventions, and I absolutely agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I'm not in any way pushing back on what you just said. You're right. We do find social connection through lots and lots of different ways. But there are only so many ways that we find social connection on a few very key emotional needs. Existentialism being one of them, morality being another one, our moral foundations and finding common ground on that. We don't look to, our more social, you could say, social groups, right? Our hobby groups, our friend groups, our other groups are not the basis of our moral foundations or our existential beliefs. And that's where religion tends to dominate.
Yeah, it kind of gives people easy answers.
Exactly. And there's a great many people out there who I have found seem to not exist somehow in some atheists' heads. And this is not directed, again, this is not to you, but we're both part of a secular group where this is an attitude that is expressed often, is you don't need God to be good, and you don't need, God as a moral foundation. And you're right, you don't. But there are people who do. And I don't know that we can so easily just get around that by saying, well, yeah, but you know what I mean?
There's also a lot of atheists out there who used to believe, and they used to believe they needed those things until they didn't.
Well, no, that's absolutely right. But what did they give up exactly? Did they give up their moral foundations, which were based on that? Not really. What did they change? Right? Oh, no, absolutely. And some people change radically. So did I. My moral foundations are completely different after my so-called conversion experience or deconversion experience, right? It's an interesting conversation to have, and one that I would like to have with you in more detail off mic, because I think it might go too off the beaten path for what we're trying to cover in this podcast. If that'd be okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay,
and
great.
I'm happy to come back too. Absolutely.
No, this is as you can see, this is a topic I've given some thought to, and I'm keen to discuss with other people in the secular community, because I don't feel I've spoken with some about this and get general agreement with what I'm talking about, but not broad agreement. It's hard for the secular community as a whole to embrace the fact that other people aren't like them. And just because they're a certain way doesn't mean other people are or ever will be. And that's the part of divergence, I think, that I run into with people. Because I used to think the same way. And then I did a lot more psych study. And it's like, oh, yeah, just because I want to project myself onto the world doesn't mean the world wants me doing that, you know, which is an interesting. Anyway, I find it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, I always have to figure out like how much should I say, you know? One of the things I've found in secular community is that there there's almost like a 50-50 split. And this is not 100% of the people, but there's people who were deeply traumatized by religion
Mm-hmm.
and have stories like mine. And then there's people who've never been in religion. They were raised completely secular. And then like when people like me or like you tell them our stories about like what we went through and what we experienced, they're like, what?
Right. Exactly. Because their eyes are open to a level of abuse they never imagined possible.
Well, but yeah, it's hard for people to imagine that have grown up with some sense of like normal reality to visualize what it's like to live in a completely alternate reality. And then for them to further realize that a lot of people they've interacted with in their lives live in that completely alternate reality.
That's exactly what I've been spending the last decade trying to educate the public about.
It's a huge trip. And I one of the episodes of yours that I listened to was about your exit from Scientology.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's incredible and to hear you and other former Scientologists talk in your lingo is really a trip.
Yeah. 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 I hope we didn't ARC break you too much with.
I'm honestly fascinated by all of it. Like, so,
yeah.
I mean, okay, so here's another part of my story, right?
Yeah.
I didn't actually become an atheist until 2015 sometime. And that was after I read Richard Dawkins's book, The God Delusion.
Mm-hmm.
And the chapter that hit me the hardest was the one about childhood indoctrination.
Mm.
And it talks about how like little kids, and this is born and raised in cult kids, like this is your entire worldview.
Mm-hmm.
You obey your parents, you listen to your parents, and little kids are sponges. They're not critical thinkers. And if mommy says, don't go down by the river, there's crocodiles, like you better listen because like it's for your own good. And then by this same mechanism of you being a little sponge, that's how religion takes over your brain. And that's how this happens. And it's like, oh, wow. And then this profound realization hit me where, well, the only reason I ever believed in a God in the first place was because everyone around me did. Right. My whole family, my whole social circles, everyone I knew believed in this. And even when I went to public schools later, it's like, you hear talk of it all the time, God this and Jesus that. It's like you just assume it's real and it's real to you for that reason. And coming to that realization that this is why I believe this, and I did not have good reasons to actually believe this. Like I kind of went into like a week-long panic attack at that point.
Yeah, like, I get that. I totally get that.
Everything before me in my life that I ever thought I knew is wrong. It's suspect. It's my whole life up to this point has been going the wrong direction. All of this stuff my whole world came crashing in at that point. And that's when I realized that, you know, not only did I not have to stay in the closet as a queer person anymore, I get to live my life on my own terms, but also now I have no reason to be scared of higher education. And in fact, I should probably go get some so I could do something with my life. All of that led me to study psychology when I started in college. And one of the first classes I took it was my second semester. I took intro psych classes my first semester, and that was hugely informative. I had a lot of realizations at that point. And then I hit an introductory neuroscience class my second semester. And that's when I learned like how different regions of the brain perform different functions and stuff. And that's how I learned to understand that, these voices that condemned me in my head, these are just background chatter. This is just brains doing brain stuff, and it's not real.
Right.
And so that's profoundly important. And then I ended up getting a job as an intern in a behavioral preclinical neuroscience lab. And behavioral meaning the connection between brain structures and brain chemistry and behavior.
Yep.
And preclinical meaning we test on non-human subjects. And in the case of the lab that I worked in, this was primarily rats. And I have right here a
rat brain.
This is a rat brain. If my camera will focus, maybe it doesn't want to. Let's try this. Anyway, that's the idea. So that's the brain of a rat. It's very small, but it has, rats being mammals and us being mammals, it has a lot of similar structures to human brains, except a lot smaller. And another thing about the evolution of brains over time is they've kind of evolved from the inside to out. Like, so down on the inside of our brains, down toward the brainstem, are the much more primitive structures.
Right.
And then out toward the front up here is our frontal lobes. And this is the most recently developed structure in mammalian brains. And also the folds, the complexity of the cortex is a more recent evolution. So this detail will never show up from this brain, but if you zoom in and look, the cortex of a rat brain is very smooth. It doesn't have all the gullies and stuff in it. And those actually add to brain connectivity and possible more thinking. Well, anyway, down toward the brainstem, barely off the brainstem, is a region of the brain called the amygdala. Mm-hmm. And this region of the brain is what stores fear and pain. And I had this profound realization one time when I was working on an experiment where we were teaching rats to be afraid of a certain stimulus by shocking the floor of a cage that they're in. So like a mild electric shock, kind of like a spark plug wire on a car. Like it's not going to damage you, but it's like, ah. And these rats are in these little cages, and we give them the stimulus and then we shock them. So we're training them to associate pain with whatever stimulus we're giving them. Mm-hmm. And, we can later remove the brains of these rats and slice them very thin on some lab equipment down to like a few cells thick. And we can look at exactly what's happening in the brain in terms of the cells, in terms of the chemicals, neurotransmitters, and what exactly is going on in the brain after various types of fear stimuli, for example. Sure. And so we know a great deal about how brains actually work in these cases, and trauma is trauma. That's the thing you want to put down to people is trauma is trauma. We have physical abuse of children, but there's also psychological abuse of children using stories that are completely imaginary. And the thing is you can completely imaginary events can trigger the same fear response in your body. Mm-hmm. Like if you encounter a stimulus that your amygdala has said, mark this for later, this hurts us. And then your brain recognizes this input from your, auditory or visual systems or whatever, triggers that fear memory. And then off goes your HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary axis, where your fight or flight response is. Right. This is the sending off the adrenaline and cortisol over long-term stress and such.
Right. And so this
completely imaginary things like God are placed into your brain as a child at the same time that fear of parents is establishing itself in you.
Yeah. True enough, and all true, except a couple things. Thing number one, in the absence of any religious indoctrination, children will naturally come up with supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. As another research you can look up the literature on it. I can't sit here and cite it to you right now, but I guess I could dig it up if I had to. But it's very interesting literature. Studies done in Japan and other places, I think Sweden, definitely Japan, where young children, I'm talking 3 to 5 years old, right, are surveyed, are studied on this point, and it was abundantly clear that even in the absence of any religious indoctrination of any kind about God or spirits or supernatural elements, children will simply invent them.
Oh, sure.
And that's not a small point. That's a very important point, because that means because we're not naturally critical thinkers, you have to be trained to do it. We will find the first ready explanation for agency that we can imagine, even if it's the wind, and that's somehow personified or created into a personification by our ability to establish agency at a young age. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because it directly contradicts the assertion in the secular community that it's only the product of religious indoctrination, when in fact it's not.
There's yes and no.
Okay.
So it's fair to say that all religions trace all stories of gods.
Yeah.
And to a more abstract level, all imagined human explanations for natural phenomena trace their way back to our imagination, trying to make sense of the world in the absence of solid information.
That's right.
And so little kids do imagine imaginary friends. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't teach them about gods or Jesus or whatever, they might have an imaginary friend, panda or something. This is a thing. It's our brains are trying to make sense of the world around us and explain why things happen.
That's right.
It's sort of the higher order thinking of our more evolved parts of our brains, our prefrontal cortex and such. We're trying to make sense of the world around us and develop our own mental map as we go.
That's right.
Part of our learning process. And it's not strictly religion that's the only imagined process, but religion comes out of that human imagination.
That's right.
And it also does much more damage than like a normal kid's imagination going wild with them. You might have a kid growing up in a secular home who has an imaginary friend who plays with them at their imagination tea parties or whatever. But by the time they hit like middle school and have started to learn some science and stuff like that, that goes away.
Oh, maybe. Maybe it does.
How many adults do you know who have imaginary friends that are not related to religion?
Oh, you might be surprised.
Maybe I would.
I mean, only in that I had a decades of experience with people telling me or being exposed to people's incredibly intimate secrets over time and over space, right? In my time in Scientology, all those folders of all those sessions tell you more than just their dirty secrets from, their torture dungeon. They also tell you all about their inner thoughts and feelings and all of that. I learned a great deal about people in Scientology inadvertently. But all that only
people make that stuff up, though.
No, not that kind of stuff. I'm talking about present time problems and incidents and things that they have, and disassociation, especially in Scientology, where it's induced on purpose, can create some very interesting headspaces, and trauma responses include possible manifestations of varying degrees of multiple personality disorder, for example. It's, it can go extreme to split personalities. I'm not talking about Sybil here. I'm talking about voices in your head and giving credence and credibility to them. And a lot of people do that. But they'll assign it to God or something maybe later, but that didn't start that way. That kind of thing. Religion is a very multifaceted topic that covers such a wide range of behavior and belief that it's it's difficult for me to talk honestly about it in such broad general terms. It's good, it's bad, it's right, it's wrong. It's all of these at once, depending completely on the context. And having immersed myself in for years in the negative side of it, I have to take pains to say these things, not only because I'm trying to have a debate, but because I'm trying to point out that we can harp on the bad so much that that's all we see. And we never look at the good that it does. And there is good that it does, and organizationally and individually and behaviorally. And we can't negate that because we're so outraged about the abuses, which are outrageous and need to be stopped. So that's where I'm coming from on it in a broad sense, if that makes it, and I hope that makes sense, because it's where I've arrived to after 10 years of recovery from this. Because believe me, when I first got out, I was fucking fuck religion. And I'm still fuck religion in many, many ways. I hate organized religion and I hate what they do. But there's a need being met with religion that atheism is never going to catch up to. And that's what I think. Right or wrong, good or bad, that's what I think.
No, that's totally okay. And you absolutely don't even apologize for pushing back on anything I say. I'm not.
I just want you to know where I'm coming from. Fair enough. Yeah.
Anything, right? But yeah, it is very complex, and it's very hard to separate out, what from what. Like I know people in more liberal Christian churches, for example, who are very good people.
Yep.
Unitarians, for example, that's one religion that doesn't seem to do a whole lot of harm and does quite a bit of good.
It's so funny because my stepmom is Unitarian and my grandmother-in-law is a young Earth creationist. Got the whole spectrum right there in my family,
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
It is.
I think ultimately the only antidote is learning about neuroscience.
Yeah.
Learning what our brains actually look like and do and how they function.
Yeah.
And how we're really not that much different than the Neanderthals and Homo erectus and stuff that we evolved from.
That's right. That's right.
We are apes. We are apes. And everything about us and our behaviors today can be understood in that context.
Yep. This is the lesson I learned through Robert Sapolsky rather than neuroscience, but it involved neuroscience as well as the rest of human behavioral biology. He did a whole, do you know who Robert Sapolsky is?
Yes, I actually, I've seen quite a bit of his videos.
Good. Yeah, he did a whole Stanford University college course on human behavioral biology, and it's all online, all the lectures, like 27 of them or something. I've gone through that thing twice. I want to go through it again. It was epiphanal. It was absolutely crucial to my understanding of how our thinking and our beliefs and everything work.
Yeah, our brains are just, evolved over millions and hundreds of millions of years to keep us alive. That's basically what they do. And we can be fooled very easily because our brains are not computers with logic in them.
That's right.
We take in what's around us and we interpret it in a way. We just try to make sense of it.
Exactly. And how we go about doing that is sometimes pretty goddamn goofy, and other times genius. It's amazing what the same brain can even do in different contexts. It's absolutely fascinating. Let's get back to the podcast because I want to ask you two other questions and then I want to see about wrapping up our recording. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. All right. Because I'm genuinely curious about how this happened. And you talked a bit about education here. How did you wake up to this whole thing being the wrong thing that it is, despite it being your normal for so many years growing up? What was your path out of this? I don't even want to say light bulb moment, because at least for me, it's not one thing. It's a number of things. But what happened to you?
It is a number of things. I can point to a few light bulb moments. The first one I already talked about, which was the book that went around that talked about the sect that I came from, and kind of exposed its history and stuff. And not long after is when my family got kicked out of the church. And I just kind of went on about life after that without really thinking much more about it. Like I should have been in therapy, honestly. A lot of therapy, but I wasn't. But at least my family never went to another church again. And so I just went on about life as whatever normal is.
May I interrupt you to ask, what was it that got your parents kicked out? They did not leave of their own accord?
Well, it was related to the divorce and remarriage issue. And my dad speaking up about that. And they basically said, well, you either shut up about that or, we'll take your meeting away. And my parents were like, well, okay, we're done. Like we just left.
Wow. That was the moral transgression. That was the difference that just put it there for them. Just, oh, well, okay, then we're done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they heard enough people's stories to know that, sometimes divorce and remarriage was necessary and it was not right the way that the church was treating people.
Right. I'm surprised that book was allowed to be read inside that group. Were there no strictures about that?
Oh, there were. They told people not to read it.
Okay. But people didn't listen.
Yeah, some people don't listen to those kinds of things.
Right. Well, it's funny how the deepest indoctrination, the most, that sometimes the person that you never imagine would go against the grain. If you present them with a mystery or you tell them there's something they're not allowed to know, sometimes that all by itself will it's like a splinter in their mind. They just can't let it go. I have to know. What are you talking about?
Yeah, this was for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like I was told, we were not supposed to watch TV, but I would watch TV if I went to a friend's house. I was not supposed to listen to worldly music, but I listened to worldly music on the school bus if a friend had a Walkman, and I got introduced to all the good stuff. And
so technology was as much the undoing of this thing than as anything else.
Yeah, I retained a healthy skepticism of everything I was supposed to avoid.
Okay.
Or about the rules of the things I was supposed to avoid. And the whole divorce and remarriage thing, like I knew enough about what was going on with my parents and the stories they knew. And I knew enough of that to know that, well, they were in the right on this particular issue and the church was in the wrong. So I was done with that church at that point. It was several years later, into my early 20s, I think, I found a book called The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine.
Good book.
Yes. And he basically tears the Bible apart and explains what a hot steaming dumpster fire that is. And I read Candide by Voltaire and, other things along the way. And I was always interested in hearing about other people's religions too, coworkers, people I met randomly. And it's like, they want to tell me about their religious beliefs or whatever. And boy, did I hear about a lot of different religious beliefs. Like I heard about everything from like Pentecostalism to voodoo to, to Satanism to whatever. And I just take it all in. Tell me your story. What's your story? And I would ask questions. Well, what do you think about this? Well, how big is the universe? Well, what does this do for you or whatever? And gradually, over this time, I'm sort of developing an idea that organized religion is just all bullshit. All of it. Everybody's got their own ideas. And the story that I like to tell is about the blind man trying to describe an elephant.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
One touches the trunk and says it's a snake, and another touches a leg and says it's a tree, and another one touches a tail and says it's a rope or whatever. Like everybody's just trying to describe a little bit of the world in a context that they understand because their senses are limited. Right.
That's right. I could not agree with you more about that.
So I ended up going through various different iterations of like spiritualism and Wicca and agnosticism and stuff like that. But I would still occasionally get panic attacks thinking, oh, God's watching me. And I'm not I don't know if you noticed, but like not exactly cisgender heterosexuals living a biblical morality lifestyle here.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
So
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
so I always have these voices going off in my head,
Right.
condemning me for being broken and wrong and what's wrong with me. And like, fortunately I didn't come across like conversion therapy or stuff like that. But I did run across the writings of a guy named Ray Blanchard, which really sent me down a deep, dark spiral. And maybe we can talk about that later. But um, that it wasn't until 2015 when I read Dawkins's book that like I went from agnostic to atheist. Like that's when I realized this whole stuff is the only reason I ever believed in this God stuff to begin with. And this is not true either. This fundamental assumption is not true. It's like there might be some greater power out there in the universe beyond human understanding. Maybe that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no human being on earth who has access to any more information about that than I do.
There you go.
Or than science does, right?
That's right.
If anybody's going to figure this out, it's science. And so I can wait on science. And that's when it hit. And that's when like everything behind me just became, that crazy life flashing before my eyes kind of thing. Jean-Paul Sartre describes this as nausea. You just go through this nausea, like you've been abandoned. Because here you believe that there was this God always with you, wherever you were, even if you're by yourself, you can always reach out to God. Now you find yourself abandoned completely. There's no God there. Like this is a majorly intense experience.
I understand. Yes, very much so.
But that was the formative experience for the life I'm living now, basically.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm always interested in how it happens with people because often it's some kind of series of I've described it as moral transgressions or like irrefutable, undeniable. Something happens that you just can't cognitive dissonance your way through. And for your parents, apparently that was this divorce issue and probably preceded by other things before that, and it builds and builds and builds until for that context of that person and their belief set, they go, nope, this ain't it anymore. And they have these moments. And sometimes
I like the Mormon way of talking about it. It's like when you have doubts or questions, you put them up on a shelf. And then at some point you put too much stuff up on the shelf and the shelf breaks.
Oh, how interesting. How interesting. Let me, just because it's so parallel, I have got to share this with you because I think the audience will appreciate this too. Because I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that. And I'll tell you why, is because somebody made that exact same analogy to me in Scientology, except instead of, you take your worries, you take your concerns, you take your problems, your issues, the things you're upset about right now, you put it on a shelf. You got to get your job done, right? No case on post is the Scientology thing. And case is the word for all your trauma, all your junk, all your emotional baggage and everything. And auditing in Scientology is where you're going to take care of that. You're not going to take care of that in conversation. You're not going to take care of that otherwise. You got to go in session. So until you go in session, you got to learn how to chill that stuff out. So you put it on a shelf, you put it on a shelf, you put it on a shelf. And what I was told is that in the course of your duties as a Scientology staff member, helping other people with the stuff they're putting on their shelves, you finally get in session to deal with all your bullshit on your shelf and you go up to get it and it's not there anymore because you poofed it. You made it all go away because you were being so causative in your work, in your day-to-day, that you were just making all that go away all in the background.
There's a, yeah. That
just exactly. Share, just because you made me think of it with the shelf thing, yeah. I thought I would share that difference in experiences there,
That's a perfect way to talk about the whole like abuse scandal that's going on in the 2x2s right now.
And this is what I wanted to go to and wrap up on. So please tell me what happened. What is this thing?
Great. Yeah. So like, one of the things I've seen in the forums online is that a lot of people have kind of known that something's been going on for a long time. And there've been people sending out mass letters and stuff on the internet for couple of decades now, being like, listen to me, I was abused, I was raped by this person. Like they're trying everything to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing's happening, and like the people in the group, the friends, are like, well, we're praying for something to be done about this. We're waiting for God to do something about it. And the workers, this is coming from the workers and from the overseers too, is like, well, we're gonna pray for this to be taken care of in God's way and in God's time and stuff like that. And it's kind of the similar thing as like, well, just ignore what's happening right now, just set it aside, And what's happening in this case is like, it's not being set aside quite so much anymore. The workers are still preaching that you should set it aside, and people are still believing that you should set it aside and pray about it. But there's more people realizing that that's not working.
Right.
And the only thing that really matters is humans standing up and taking human actions. Like you can't, obviously, once you become atheist, you realize that like prayer doesn't do anything, right? Like there's nothing there to help anyone do anything. And in this case, what happened with the recent the overseer situation is this guy died in a hotel room, and there was some mess left behind, basically, in terms of laptops and phones and material and incriminating evidence and victim statements and stuff like that. So there's all this stuff, and then it gets out, and they can no longer be like, well, just put it up on your shelf or just pray about it. It's like, no, people are like, all right, we've had enough. We're taking action. And people within the group are like, they're leaving, they're walking out, and they're making statements like the farm properties where the annual conventions are typically held. Owners of those properties are going, well, where I live, I have legal liability if someone gets molested on my property. Like, you need to either set some rules down and enforce them, or you're not going to meet on my property anymore.
Right. They're getting the reverse of what they've been pushing on other people for a while now, of this, we're not going to have our meetings here. Now they're being told, no, you're not having your meetings here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let me clarify for the audience here. I'm reading from the Wikipedia page about the 2x2s. You can look it up there. And there is a note here about this thing called the Dean Letter, which is, I think, what we're referring to here. This is this year. This is March 20th, 2023. A letter was released from Overseer Doyle S. Smith informing members of the discovery of predatory and sexually abusive behavior by recently deceased worker and overseer Dean Brewer. Is that how you say his name?
Correct.
Yeah. And since that release, hundreds of allegations, this is not a big group. Hundreds of allegations of sexual abuse and child sexual abuse have been reported within the church from all over the world. Members have been split in their reactions, as you were just describing.
Almost 600 reports now to the tip lines. Yeah. And this is a group that is maybe 100,000 worldwide.
Right. So the percentages here are way off, guys. Way off.
And some of these names on these lists are people that I remember coming through our house in childhood.
Yeah.
Because my parents were former workers and had status and extra guest bedrooms and stuff like that. Like we always had workers in our house, like all the time. And some of them were those people.
Jesus. This is just, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the framework of this and how this is structured with the workers and the overseers and the itinerant ministers walking, going from place to place, you put that much power and authority in people where their verbal orders are the law, and you put them in front of, and then you give them a enforced life of celibacy, which these people apparently are supposed to be abiding by, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And then you put them in with kids, and well, we know what happens. This group is not the only one where that occurs. And,
it goes back to that those biblical ideas of sexuality, in other words, which are really terrible. And there's no education no consistent education as to what consent is. Like, consent is a word that is never spoken in a meeting anywhere. Like, children having bodily autonomy, well, that's automatically out, because like that does away with corporal punishment too. If you teach that children are supposed to have bodily autonomy, the whole system is broken, or maybe broken by design.
Well, it's a control system. It's a control structure.
And it's such that it causes these problems.
That's
like the system creates the predators and it shields the predators from accountability.
Exactly.
It's like, did you ever see the movie Spotlight?
Oh yeah.
There, one thing that really, really hit home for me was that one priest that was just like so naive and innocent, that didn't seem to understand like what even was wrong. Like, and you can see how this happens. Someone grows up kind of isolated and in a very primitive religion and a primitive worldview, and they don't understand any of the modern issues around, bodily autonomy, consent, healthy sexuality. There's no one modeling healthy sexuality for them. And naturally, these things are the outcomes that are inevitable.
Exactly. They are inevitable. That is the right word to use. This is not, this is not like a few bad apples. This is a systemic problem.
Yes. The barrel is rotten.
That's right.
And every barrel on the truck that they're riding on is rotten. Like every denomination of Christianity is rotten in this same way. The systems create the abuse and perpetuate it, and they can't be fixed.
Fair enough. I believe that there are perhaps modifications that could assist things, but I agree that there seems to be there are very big problems with a belief set. This is as far as I'll go with this, and this is my criticism for today, and we'll kind of leave it at this, I think, for because we've already been talking for so long. There's a problem with any belief set that's going to treat women and children as property. And when we talk about a systemic issue, at least from my perspective, that's unavoidable when you get into most Christian denominations. I know for a fact there are some that do not think that way, but that's actually not, if you go to the scriptures, that's what's there. It's not like it's hard to figure out why these people think this way. Their quote unquote good book tells them to think this way, that women are chattel, that children are property, that they are animals to be beaten on and broken. And this is the modern rendition of this is Gothards and the Duggars and the evangelicals and the extreme Pentecostals and this nonsense that we see in 2x2, where the most extreme interpretations of these scriptures are reality to these people. And they do not in any way fit in with, as you pointed out correctly, how we've evolved as a society. It's not just we have these stupid ideas in our modern culture and eventually all those will go away and we'll get back to the good stuff the way it's supposed to be. That's how they think. And that's wrong. That's anti-evolutionary. It's anti-progressive. It's backwards thinking. And that's, to the degree it continues to insist on its rightness, is where we keep bumping into it in society, where we're going, no, you don't get to do that to children anymore. No, your women, your wives are not your property, and they don't have to listen to every single commandment you give them. They actually have free will. What? They can't deal with this. And that's where we get such a departure. And when they go too far, we talk about them as cults. And that's what this is. You know?
Well, to some extent, yeah, like the more liberal sects of Christianity will creatively interpret the Bible to mean something other than what it obviously says.
My point, exactly.
Like they interpret it through the lens of social justice, for example, and that's great. I appreciate those people. The people that put the rainbow flags outside their church. You know what? That's better than I had it growing up. If you got to be indoctrinated into a religion, let it be a liberal version of it for, hopefully.
Exactly.
But the thing is like the misogyny and stuff is still there in the back. It's part of the cultural fabric. It's the water you're swimming in. Like one story that I point to a lot is the story of in 2 Samuel 12, I think, the story of David and Bathsheba. maybe Christians will know this story, but King David, he has the hots for his best friend's wife, and is plotting to get her for himself, and so he sends his friend off to die in battle, and then he takes the wife, and then God gets very angry with David and punishes David by having the rest of David's wives raped by someone else in public. That's the punishment for David.
Right. Because they're his property, and this is an offense against him, right? That kind of attitude?
Yes. You don't know any of the wives' names. They are not independent human beings with their own autonomy, their own existence, their own minds.
Right.
They don't matter. They are property. And this is a crime against David's property.
Right.
And then it goes on, right? So he makes a baby with Bathsheba, and God again punishes David by killing that baby, as if the baby did something to deserve this punishment. And supposedly David is punished by it. And then after the baby dies, David gets back up and goes on with his life as usual, figuring, well, God's already punished me. All he's going to punish me. So off we go. This, people can, the sad thing is people can hear this story with a completely different context and get a completely different idea about it. And they'll tell you it's a story about God's love and forgiveness.
Right.
And they'll never think about what the story actually says in plain words on the page.
Exactly. And that's where we tend to, in the secular world, tend to depart from those more prosaic interpretations. We go, hey man, what are you talking about? This is just not right. You know?
Yeah. It's just like the whole thing. Men are the boss, women and children are second, not important, don't matter. That is the prevailing attitude. And it's just the cultural fabric of the Bible.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with you. Unfortunately, because it's how I see it as well. When you look at this through a lens of human rights and dignity and free will, you see that these are anathema to that, right? They clash. They're directly in opposition. And if you think this is a small problem, I'd invite you to go check out Shiny Happy People again. Or any other number of documentaries about this. This is not a small problem. I've harped on this for years on my channel. I know it really offends some people, and I've taken pains to try to understand the other point of view. I think I've demonstrated that here today. But the fact of the matter is abuse. And child abuse and spousal abuse is rampant in those communities. I don't care if you agree with me or not, or think that it's somehow offensive that I tell you that. It's true. It doesn't mean your personal beliefs, you're sitting here listening to this podcast right now, are wrong and awful and I hate you. That doesn't mean that at all. And it's not what I'm saying. Believe whatever you want, but what you do with those beliefs matters. And if what you do with it is use them to abuse people, you're on the wrong side of the equation.
Well, I like to say, I can't. People like to say, well, let people believe what they want.
Mm.
But you can't do that because beliefs have consequences.
Fair
people
enough.
have a belief that you're supposed to physically abuse children in order to make sure they are on the right side of God. This is a genuine belief that people have, and they are acting on that belief with the very best of intentions.
I can't.
But the belief is not justifiable, and the belief is harmful.
Fair enough. I'm trying to make a differentiation between what goes on in a person's mind versus what they do with their hands and feet, because those are two different things. And often a lot of us will have uncharitable thoughts and ideas and beliefs and yet not act on them. And I think that is true. And I think that is where we can most clearly draw the line for anybody. I think anybody of any denomination, any following, any background can understand that concept. You can believe, you can have the ideas in your head. They can live rent free. I don't care. What I care about is what you do with them. That's what I care about, you folks out there, right?
Exactly. But this is a real thing. Like some thoughts we have in our heads we don't act on, and some we do.
Mm-hmm.
But the belief that children need to be hit in order to behave, this is a belief that is coming from a particular kind of place and culture.
Mhm.
And it is a belief that expresses itself in harm.
Mhm.
And it's not usually the case that someone has a belief that children should be spanked and then does not actually do it. Right.
No, fair enough. It's just
like,
there's also so many non-religious beliefs enabling that behavior too that I have a hard time pointing to just that. You know what I mean?
It's not just that.
Yeah.
But it is largely that. Like if we were to uncover the source of thinking, like if we were to ask everyone in America who thinks corporal punishment of children is okay, we are going to find that the vast majority of them are in an Abrahamic religion of a more fundamentalist sort. We're not going to find a bunch of atheists who hit their kids.
Fair enough, but just to push back a little bit, right? I get it. I totally get it. And this is me, sort of bringing nuance where I know it's not particularly the point. So I hear you. I really do. But we also have to look at the fact that we're the ones selecting that as the variable that matters, when in fact, familial, generational trauma is just as much of a factor. And fair enough. You can go to causative agents and go, well, religion is, justifying or rationalizing this. And it's wrong to that degree. And I completely agree with that. But I have to acknowledge that there is there are a myriad of factors at play with this. And religion is one of many,
Yeah. Yeah, no, coming from the perspective of a scientist, that is true. There's you can't isolate very many things down to one single cause. That's very difficult.
Yeah, that's all. That's where I come from, because I live in the world of nuance and grays. I have to on my channel. I can't go black and white, because that's exactly the thing I push back against.
Like sometimes I speak in black and white terms, but like I also am cognizant of the fact that not everything is black and white, and very few things are. In fact, like I'm out. I have an axe to grind.
I know, and I want to help you grind it. By the way, I really do. So I hope I'm not coming across adversarial here.
No, absolutely, and I can handle it anyway.
Okay, cool. Good. All right. Well, look, we've been talking for a long time, and I am very happy to have had this conversation with you. And on that note, I wanted to give you an opportunity to also promote your channel, because you've started a YouTube channel, and I guess you're going to be starting another one. And I loved your approach, because you were, we're going to take these bad ideas out to the woodshed, right? And I was like, hell yes. So what is this about, and what are you trying to do with this?
Well, so this project, my channel is called Rivers Woodshed, and you can find it on YouTube if you search for Rivers Woodshed, or just at Rivers Woodshed all together. Basically, this grew out of I was teaching biology labs when I was in college, and then COVID hit, and we had to transition everything to online. And then I started trying to figure out how to move my whiteboard lectures onto video format. And so I got myself a graphics tablet and started learning how to make videos, instructional videos and stuff. And then I got this harebrained idea to create a channel where I attack basically fundamentalist Christianity and some of their ideas and just tear them apart. And the guiding principle there is something called Brandolini's Law. And you can find this on Wikipedia. Brandolini's Law states that refuting bullshit takes an order of magnitude greater effort than it takes to create the bullshit in the first place.
Yep.
Debunking bullshit is an extraordinary amount of work, because you can just spout off whatever you want, make up stuff. That's easy to do. But showing why it's wrong, sometimes there's like 15 wrong things in one sentence, and you go from there. So that's kind of my principle that guides what I do with that show. My next upcoming show, I'm not saying too much about yet, but I will announce it on my current channel.
Excellent. Well, I highly encourage you all to go over and check it out. Rivers Woodshed. Okay. And subscribe if you have found this conversation to be interesting. And I think you'll find the content over there to be interesting as well. Critical thinking is something you really can't quite get enough of in this world, because as we've covered here today, it's not something that we just naturally are good at. It's a discipline you have to learn, just like martial arts. You don't come out knowing how to chop boards in half. Well, you're not coming out knowing how to think or logically and sequentially the way that we would that lead to best answers all the time for us. Yeah.
I've been studying this stuff for years, and listening to like thousands of hours of podcasts and studying neuroscience and all that philosophy and everything. And like, I'm still hearing stuff from people's stories that just blows my mind.
Yeah.
So like, there's no end to it.
No, not at all. Not at all. All right, folks. Thank you very much for coming around and listening to us gabber on at a mad rate about all of this. I very much appreciate your viewership and your support. Go ahead and buy me a coffee, contribute to my ideal studio wish list. The Amazon list is there in the description section to this video down below here if you're watching this on YouTube. Otherwise, if you're listening on audio, go to my YouTube channel and show me some love over there as well. That all being said, I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.